Welcome ladies and gentlemen, this is Ghostsmith Gaming with me, Christopher, and we're going to talk about Cyberpunk 2077. Because as you might remember, in the end of the finale of the playthrough I just concluded, I wanted to give this game a bit more attention than I normally would. Cyberpunk 2077 was, after all, one of the games that I anticipated the most in the last few years, and if we compare it to, for example, Doom Eternal, it feels more important, I mean, at least to me. Now, for one, it's not that I have any ties to this Cyberpunk board game. In fact, I hardly even knew about it before playing this game. It would have been nice if I had, because as far as I can tell, there were a lot of references to that game in shards and the like. It's also not because of the fact that CD Projekt Red is the developer, and that they previously developed the Witcher series, and more notably, The Witcher 3, one of the most critically acclaimed fantasy games of all time. However, my experience with The Witcher 3 is moderate at best. I played the game from the start about 2 or 3 times, but always end up quitting at about the same point, which I think is not even half into the game. Now, there are some reasons for that, but this video is not about The Witcher 3, so let's leave it at that. So, no, the main reason why I have anticipated this game is because it's the first ever, to my mind at least, fully open world cyberpunk game, where the cyberpunk genre is embraced fully. I am by no means saying that there aren't any open world-ish games in the cyberpunk genre. Hell, I've played at least 3 of them on this channel. But Ghost Runner, Shadowrun, Cloudpunk, they're not as comprehensive as Cyberpunk 2077, even if they do have their own strengths. And I have been a Cyberpunk fan for a long time, probably starting with the Mutant Chronicles back in the day, but more solidified with the original Blade Runner, which displayed a very in-depth cyberpunk world that really spoke to me, a sort of grimy underbelly of a city with clear class structures that had fully embraced cybernetic implants. And Cyberpunk 2077 has really picked up on that and offers a very diverse world with just those elements that I love. So I wanted to give you my thoughts about what I like and dislike about the game, as well as the things I think work and things that work slightly less, let's just say. To begin with, though, I want to say that I won't be bringing up the 2 more significant issues that the game faced in the early days of launch. The problem with the PS4 and Xbox One releases, which ultimately ended with the game even being pulled from the PlayStation Store as it was near unplayable, as well as the epilepsy issue, where certain parts of the game posed a significant health risk to certain groups of people. While these issues are very, very important, and it's a travesty that CD Projekt Red released the game despite of them, they have not had an impact on my experience with the game, so I won't talk more about them than this. And with that, let's begin with the things that I maybe didn't like a whole lot, or don't think worked as well as they could have. And we're going to start with the most obvious one, the one that everyone talks about, and the one that, in my mind, is the biggest issue with the game, the glitches. This game is, wow, it's bad. It's real bad. I mean, we've always joked about Bethesda and the glitches in their games, but CD Projekt Red has firmly secured the throne as the developer that released the most bugged out game. I think that the main issue here is that this shows that the game simply isn't finished. Don't get me wrong though, content-wise it is. All the quests are there, they are completable. That is unless you encounter a bug. All items are there, characters have their voice lines and so on. But quality assurance? There doesn't seem to have been any of the sorts. And me, not knowing anything about game development, can only really come to one conclusion here, and that is lack of leadership. I simply think that the development of this game lacked clear leadership, and that different departments worked on their stuff separately, and then everything was shipped to be stitched together. Otherwise, I can't really understand why it is in such a terrible state. Now, some graphical bugs are almost to be expected. Ever since the game moved into the 3D realm, graphical glitches have been very prevalent, but Cyberpunk 2077 offers up a new dimension altogether. In the end, though, I'm happy that this is the largest issue that I have with the game, but I also think I have been slightly lucky by not encountering game-breaking bugs, as I know some people have, where main gigs have not been completable. This is a point that I have brought up during my playthrough, and it's also a point that's coming up as something I like. But the thing I dislike about Night City is that it feels hollow and uninspiring. It all boils down to a collection of elements, from the residents walking about to how the police acts to the layout of the city. Together it makes the city feel unengaging. Residents walk about but rarely interact with the player in any meaningful way. Police can only be seen in specific spots, where they always are, and you never see a police car patrol the streets. And if you get a wanted star, just drive away a block or two and you're cool. The police does not follow you. Now, the one thing I've brought up during the playthrough is the layout. It's probably the more difficult one to explain. I mentioned the lack of clear landmarks, and while it's somewhat true, it's also not entirely so. There are landmarks, but I still get the feeling that for the most part the city just isn't a fun city. It's almost too realistic, if I try to explain myself. I know that that might be a strange statement, but in a game about a futuristic cyberpunk world, realism might not be what you necessarily want. I could easily go for a lot more crazy, imaginative and out there architecture, monuments that intertwine with the buildings around them, motorized sculptures, 3D commercials, etc, etc. Just more things to further the feeling of a reality where technology has all but gone berserk. And let's also talk about doors. Now, you might be wondering what I mean about doors, but this is such a strange design choice to me, and I want to bring it up. In the game, you'll encounter doors that you can't open. They give you the locked information when going up to them. Not locked as in unlockable with the right skill, but just locked, because there's nothing behind them. Nothing strange in that, right? Well, what about the doors that don't give you the locked information? That are just scenery? What's the difference? Why did they do this? It really doesn't make sense to have two different kinds of unusable doors. And this is obviously a very minor thing, but I think it adds to the strange development process of this game, and it's something I believe developers just weren't in agreement on. There are a couple of things about the main questline that I have issues with, but as with my feelings about Night City, this is also going to come up under things I like. As for the things I dislike, we can start with the length. This is a short game, there's no question about it. I anticipated at least 40 videos for my playthrough, and I was done after 24, and that included at least 2 videos with side gigs. Now granted, this is a game with multiple beginnings and presumably multiple endings, so sure, the replay value of some parts of the game is high, but I still don't think that cuts it. This game definitely has a case of too much faff and not enough focus. Less time should have been spent on the various content around the city and more on fleshing out the main story. And as for the main story itself, it's the same issue as with Fallout 4. Once you've ejected the relic shard, been at Victor's, and then back at your apartment for the first real experience with Johnny Silverhand, the world is open up to you, and all sense of urgency is gone. Which is strange, because urgency is a central part of this game. It's laid out to V that her brain is literally being broken down, and unless she does something about it, she's going to die. So what does V do? Well, how about having a bit of a sit down with a monk, or going about town killing wanted people, or hunting down cyber psychos, or driving cars in street races? How are any of those things more important than what's eating her up from the inside, slowly replacing her with a copy of a dead rocker who lived many years ago? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, you do get the relic malfunction events every now and then, but they only help with disrupting whatever it is that you're currently doing, unless they're part of a gig. I think what I like most is the sense of urgency, and I think they missed out on an opportunity for some really exceptional storytelling there. If I could offer up an alternative, include a game mode where there's a percentage on screen slowly ticking down in-game time, and if it reaches 0, it's game over. Put the player on the spot, make sure they do not mess around too much, but also open up for a storyline after the ship has been removed. This is a smaller point for me, but a point nonetheless, and one that I mentioned before as well. The UI is a bit too busy and a bit too unintuitive. I mentioned the perk trees, charts, circuit boards, whatever they're supposed to be, and the fact that they are a bit all over the place. First off, the needed level for the respective perk is not consistent. You need to go back and forth, left and right, to find the next level. There are also visual connectors between the perks, which have absolutely nothing to do with anything, since you can take any perk you want, no matter which previous perk you've chosen. In crafting, why can't I select how many of something I want to craft? On my character I can create about 1,000 rare item components, but I can only create one every 2 seconds or so. In my backpack, why can't I select multiple items before I either sell them or dismantle them? And apart from that, the UI has way too many graphical elements that are completely pointless to the player and only really helps with distracting at best. There are more examples, but yeah, I think you get the point. Just no. No, that's not how cars behave. Driving in Cyberpunk 2077 with more high-end vehicles that you can buy feels like handling a paper car on a sheet of ice. It feels as if the cars weigh about 10 pounds and that there is no traction whatsoever. And then I got Johnny's car, and all of a sudden I had a car that handled, well, not perfectly, but a lot better. Higher sensitive stability, but still a bit all over the place. I don't know who was in charge of car physics, but that person has probably never driven a car in their life. And that's about it for the negatives of this game for me. Apart from all the glitches, it's not that bad, but sadly those take over on such a serious level that CD Projekt Red has a long way to go before the game is in a proper alpha stage. As it is now, it's late stage early access at best. There are some design choices as well that I just can't wrap my head around, that are most likely intended but really should be looked over. But on to the positive things. And I'm going to start with Night City, because holy hell, this is the prettiest city I've seen so far in an open world sandbox game. Now I'm definitely biased here with my love for Cyberpunk, but they have nailed the spike on the head with this one. The city pulses with Cyberpunk energy, and the aesthetics are simply phenomenal, both architecture and people. You want imposing megastructures? You got it. Endlessly looping commercials about controversial products? Absolutely. People with so much cybernetics that they are less human and more something else? We got you, fam. This game is giving me exactly what I wanted out of a Cyberpunk game. A world that is Cyberpunk. They've taken what is at the core of the Cyberpunk genre and in some cases dialed it up to 11. I can only hope that they expand on it in the future, opening up more and more for us, because there are still many places we can't go, and many places we can go, but where we really shouldn't, because we're not supposed to. A big addition would be to be able to freely fly wherever, but that definitely means that more development is needed. As for level design, this is something that I've noticed a lot and is something that I appreciate to no end, especially if I compare it to, for example, Fallout 4 and Skyrim. A lot of thought has gone into the level design of this game, with almost every location offering multiple paths to take in order to get where you need to be. It's almost always a good thing to explore around instead of going the quickest, fastest route. The game is therefore very well suited for many different playstyles, no matter if you want to run in, guns blazing, or sneak around and remain undetected. I definitely feel as if I could have taken more time to do just that, look around, because very often I've found interesting paths to take that I generally don't think people think about. This game has definitely raised that bar here, and I do hope other developers take after, because this is how games like this should be designed. Let's do another one of the negatives, but now what's positive? The main questline is really good. If we ignore the design choices of the pace of the game with relation to the main questline, we find a golden nugget of storytelling that truly encompasses Cyberpunk. We're presented with a story about a major corporation's desire to better people's lives, but where the leader of said corporation has his own goals. Immortality. Maybe not for him personally, but for his family, in an attempt to forever securing the literal throne of the company for all time. And then introducing a rebel rocker who, in an attempt to revenge his dead lover, blows up the central building of that corporation, which he believes are responsible. And that corporation's taking his personality and putting it on a cybernetic ship, which is later implanted into a run-of-the-mill mercenary who's only out to do the last gig of their life in the biggest heist of their generation. I mean, it can't really be a better foundation for a proper cyberpunk story, can it? And to help with that, let's talk about the next point. CD Projekt Red had a clear goal with this game, to make it one of the most immersive experiences of our time. To do that, they had to rethink how we play action-adventure RPGs, and how cutscenes are handled was a very significant part of that. It gave us a game where third-person view is not an option, because you are V. You're not an observer watching a movie, you are there. Now, as I mentioned during my playthrough, there are cutscenes in this game, and it's quite clear when they appear. For example, every time you sit down or lean onto something. But despite that, you're always in control, more or less. You're always able to look around you, although not always able to move. It makes the experience so vastly different to anything I've played before, and if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time ever that this has been done. You're free to correct me on that one though, because I could absolutely be wrong. But this has been a truly enjoyable experience for me. Something that does tie into the storytelling of the game are the characters that are included, and Cyberpunk 2077 has enough of them to satisfy most people, I believe, and the way they are presented in the respective questline gives them a lot of depth. I might be starved here because not many games offer up this level of character development for characters that are not part of the main questline, so maybe I'm painting up Cyberpunk 2077 as a bit more than it actually is, but I still think that they are very well made, almost all of them. But even so, I still want to see more. For example, in my playthrough, I went with Judy as my romance option, and once the final game with her was over, all we ever got from her were the odd messages here and there and some gifts. Nothing more. Whenever we went to her apartment, which also became a safe house, we had no interactions with her at all. She always greets you the same way, and that's that. There's nothing new from that point forward. I realize this might sound as if it should have been in the negative section, but it's very minor and something I can very much live with. One of the gimmicks, if you would, in this game is the braindance minigame. I think this was a beautiful addition to the game, and once again something that just feels cyberpunk. Living in another person's memories, being able to investigate it, picking up things that the owner of the memory didn't. It's an incredible way to engage the player in a story. It's fairly well made to boot, and my only gripe with it is that we didn't get to do it more often. I would definitely like to see some of the brain dances that are mentioned throughout the game, and it's such a shame that they haven't included some of these as something to do on the side. Something for the future, perhaps? A small point, but an important one. The music in this game is fantastic, and it's a central part of tying everything together. It really helps, as it should, with the feeling of the game and with the art style. The only issue for me here is that I would have loved for it to play an even larger part, not mainly when you are in combat. It could have been incorporated more in the various cutscenes that exist, even if I know that it might be difficult to fit in. With that, it's time to wrap things up. As you can see, there are things I like and things I dislike, things that work and things that doesn't work, like at all. Even though I believe this is a superb game, but it's a shame it was released when it was, because it's not finished. I can see myself coming back to this game in about a year or two, and hopefully we will see a Night City free from at least the most appalling graphical glitches that are still in the game. CD Projekt Red has a pretty steep uphill battle until they're there though, and I can only hope that they realize that this needs to be fixed if they are to restore their name, which has been thoroughly sullied by the issues that exist. For now though, this has been Ghostmet Gaming with me, Christopher. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.